Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GCC Podcast powered by Gateway, where we bring together the voices shaping the future of global capability centers in India and beyond. I'm your host, Suchita Vishnoi, and today we're joined by a leader who has been deeply involved in building and scaling global capability centers across industries and geographies. Our guest today is Kailash Maisekar. Currently, Kailash leads the India operations for Idox PLC, a UK-based software and services company where he is responsible for building and scaling a global capability center that supports digital transformation, product development, AI, cloud services, and global business operations. Kailash, it's a pleasure to have you on the GCC podcast. Welcome here. And I was going through your profile earlier, and what intrigued me, of course, you are on the board of companies as well, but what intrigued me more was the entrepreneur, that's written just behind your profile picture. Would you want to just double click on your sentiments around entrepreneurship before we dive into the GCC discussion?
Thank you very much, for this podcast, and thank you for taking a look at my profile as well. I've got this entrepreneur spirit and the experience is because I've actually been part of multiple acquisitions. Some of them were large acquisitions, and some of them were startups, which I started with a couple of my co-founders based in Silicon Valley. So that entrepreneur skills have, that spirit and that zeal and all of that adrenaline rush has
Yes.
always been there and will be there until I die, I guess.
So that's lovely. I think that's a very big skill to have because I've inducted myself in this space in the last few years. But given the volatility in the market, this is like a must have skill now for anyone, no matter where you work or what job you do. So thank you on sharing your perspective there. I'll get started on a few questions that I have for you, Kailash. Uh, One, I think we need a big picture on your perspective as far as the industry is growing, especially the GCC landscape. And given your experience of building GCCs across industries and working closely with the government and industry bodies, right? How do you see the role of India-based GCCs changing in the global enterprise ecosystem today? That's just beyond cost and delivery, the value that we are adding.
That's a question that I get almost everywhere on every single panel, that we discuss, or in every single forum, that we discuss or being part of, I think, the best way to put it, how the industry is shaping, in terms of the GCC and how the landscape is now changing is by looking at some of the numbers. I typically look at three key numbers, which are an indicator of what's happening in the industry, whether it is going up, going down, or what's happening. So three indicators for me are: one is exports. What is the total number of exports that we have in the country in terms of IT exports? And then what is the share of GCC in that particular growth? Right? That's number one. And then you can dive into the details of, how much Hyderabad is doing, how much Bangalore is doing, how much Pune
Industry.
is doing, and all of that, right? That's one indicator. The second indicator is the sheer number of GCCs that are growing every year. Year on year, if you look at, what's the number of GCCs that are coming in all types of GCCs. We talk about nano GCCs, micro GCCs, large, mega GCCs, and then there are niche GCCs as well who are doing only R&D or those kind of things. The third what I look at is what is the workforce that is being employed in the GCCs, right? That's the third aspect, right? Now, these three numbers actually give you a good perspective of where the industry is headed. If I just give you an example, let's take an example of Pune. The overall exports of Pune in 2025, and I'm quoting this from the STPI's data, is about 1.2 lakh crores. That's what was the software exported just out of Pune, and that was a jump of 30% from 2024. So if you look at the 2024 data and 2025, there is a 30% jump in there, which shows very clearly that the number of exports are rising. And if you double click on that, you will see how many GCCs have actually come up and how many GCCs have actually contributed towards that export growth, right? And I'm not even talking about Bangalore and Hyderabad, which are probably much bigger numbers, than Pune. Now, the second is, what I talked about is the number of GCCs. Then again, I am quoting the NASSCOM numbers here. As per NASSCOM's 2025 report, it says there are about roughly about 1,800 GCCs, odd GCCs in 2025. And by 2030, the expectation is around 2,400 GCCs, which is again another 30% increase, roughly. Now, the third is workforce. Let's look at in 2024-25. Again, this is NASSCOM's report, which says that GCCs alone employed around 1.9 million people. The number of GCCs, the expectation is that it may go up to 200, 2.5 million to 3 million people, being employed. Of course, we talk about AI disruption and all kinds of things, yet the sheer number of scale that India offers and the growth projections that we have, from various different agencies, some of them like NASSCOM or STPI and others, that clearly shows there is a clear trend upward. The second perspective, what we are looking at is earlier we were looking at GCCs which were only mega GCCs, like 10,000, people employing 15,000 people, 20,000 people. Now the trend is moving towards more of specialized GCCs. In GCCs, which are focused completely on R&D, GCCs, we are focused, completely on a specific sector. Now, if you look at, for example, and then if you see another trend, what is happening is these various cities are now building their own niche in those areas. If you look at semiconductor, Bangalore has clearly taken the lead, in terms of design, technology. NXP is an example, Marvel Technology is another example, NVIDIA, AMD, I could just go on. Similarly, if you look at Pune, most of the engineering and automotive and, those kind of skills predominantly, based out of Pune, you name it, Mercedes Benz, John Deere, you can name so many. And similarly, if you look at Hyderabad, McDonald's being a quick service restaurant, can have their own GCCs. Marriott International Hotels can have their GCCs. There is a greater trend that is now shifting towards specialized GCCs who are doing more value added stuff and not just the shared services stuff. These numbers, these trends clearly demonstrate that it is now moving from a cost to value. Why? Because number one, GCCs have now become more of enabling companies. So we are not just consolidating functions, but we are also streamlining processes. We are adopting the best of the best practices, global best practices. We are utilizing the advanced technologies. We have gained all the productivity and the efficiency gains that we could do from all of these technologies. And above all, we have a global view of what's happening in the parent as well as the group companies. Second aspect I look at is access to the global talent pool. And we all know what India has to offer. One of the trends that we are seeing in the GCCs now is reinvention. There's very few people talking about reinvention now. A lot of people talk about invention and innovative and all of that helps. But there's a lot going on in the reinvention stuff because a lot of the GCC, a lot of the companies are like 50-year, 100-year-old companies. They have their code base, which is going through a transformation. A lot of companies are now going through that transformation. Is that transformation happening just through fancy new technologies? No, a lot of it being reinvented. A lot of the code is being rewritten, right, to accept or adopt, the new technologies, new behaviors of the customer. So that's the second aspect. And the third aspect, what I see is GCCs have now become an empowerment house for the global organization. What I mean by that is now GCCs are enabling change within the company. So a lot of the now headquarters now using GCC as an enabler for the change based on the market dynamics. And lastly, it goes back to what I said is GCCs are now becoming the, not just the innovation hubs, but they're also becoming re-innovation hubs, right? Every time you have to redo something, I think GCCs are best positioned because they know the global view of the organization, global view of the customers, global view of the platforms, technologies, best practices, processes, workflows. We have a global view, and therefore we are well positioned to actually not just do innovation, but also do re-innovation.
Okay. I actually love both these words on reinvent and re-innovate because we are all talking about innovation, right? But we're not talking about the unlearning process that needs to be aligned to the customer needs and change, customer buying pattern that's changing. So I'm glad you touched upon that. And that actually leads me to the execution part because you've built GCCs from scratch, you've scaled them and led complex integration. What do you truly believe differentiates a well run GCC from one that only looks successful on paper? So leaving aside the reinvent and re-innovate, which is definitely something that's the need of the hour, and that leads me to the execution perspective. But what do you think would be one that a GCC should run very successfully, not only on paper, but actually on ground?
Well, that's a very, very good question. And it's pretty much relevant, in the industry today. There are a lot of people, a lot of consultants, out there who will talk about so many things, what a GCC should have, or, should, go through the maturity curve. They have come up with various which maturity models and all of that. However, I have a slightly different take, on that, because being part of the GCC, running the GCC and having met so many of my peers, what I learned one thing is not one GCC is same. They're all different. They have their own, they are different in their unique ways.
Yes, there won't be any very specific.
Correct. So if I try to replicate a standardized maturity model, upon, every single GCC, I think it's more likely to fail, right? It may succeed in some GCCs which have common variables and common characteristics, but beyond that, I think once you reach certain scale, I think it becomes really difficult. What I believe is most GCCs, they go through a journey, right? First journey is, they set up, their GCC here. The objective is clearly to scale, take on more and more services as much as possible, because the clear objective in the beginning is a cost arbitrage, right? That's all of us have started, with that objective, right? Once you have reached certain scale and you have reached, certain cost arbitrage, the expectation is you start taking on some ownership and responsibility. That's the second level of maturity. And that's, like I said, from my experience, I'm defining maturity of any GCC in this way: is you start taking on little more ownership where there is a shared ownership. So, someone is owned by the HQ and the subsidiaries, and something is owned by the GCCs. We are still not doing a lot more complex stuff. It's still done by the HQ. We are probably doing some low to medium complex stuff. Once we mature in that area, that's where is the third phase of our accountability comes in, where we will start taking more of accountability, take complete ownership. So, for example, if we have a product, if you have a portfolio of 50 products, maybe start with taking ownership of 5 products, end to end ownership of 5 products, right from ideation of new features to talking to the customers, voice of customer, getting the prioritization done, putting on into those backlogs stories, and then eventually developing those and putting it into production, and then releasing it to finally customers and taking the feedback and closing that loop. So all of that is a full accountability. And that's when I believe that a lot of GCCs get to that stage where once you have taken accountability, that's now the foundation of doing more of innovation. So unless you reach that stage, I think claiming innovation would be a misnomer, because you haven't really understood the ownership of the critical business processes or division, depending on what your scope of work is, right? So, therefore, if you put this maturity curve and then start looking at GCCs, the well run GCCs, number one, they are perfectly aligned with the HQs. Now, I would go a little beyond that. I wouldn't say they are just aligned with HQs, they should be aligned with the subsidiaries as well. It's equally important, right? I may align with the HQ, but every subsidiary. So, for example, Idox, UK, Idox Canada, Idox America, Idox, France, Germany, I need to also be aligned, with the local leadership in those subsidiaries as well, because they have their own strategic plans, they have their own targets, own customer requirements. So, if I'm not aligned with the subsidiaries, I'm more likely to fail again, because of the misaligned, strategic, focus. The second one is If your operating model is not changing over a period of time, then you are more likely to fail than
So,
succeed, because of the maturity curve that I talked about, right? Maybe as an example, in the beginning of the maturity, you are a more of a cost arbitrage model where it's a matrix structure where all of the ownership is sitting in somewhere in the HQ, and you are more of just delivering stuff, and over to accountability where you are actually owning stuff, where you have ownership, where you own the budgets, you own the teams, you own the deliverables, all of that. So if your operating model is exactly the same as it was in the first stage when you started off your GCC, I think it'll probably create a lot more problems. The third, what I look at, well run GCCs are, you start with outputs in the beginning because your KPIs are more output driven in the beginning.
yes,
At the highest level of your maturity, you become more outcome driven rather than output driven. It's
yes,
okay. It's perfectly okay in the beginning if you are just output driven. If your KPI is completely output driven, it's absolutely fine. Unlike what, some of the consultants may come and tell you that, hey, no, 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 you should have outcomes right from the day one. Cannot be, because your objective of starting the GCC is totally different in the beginning, right? You mature. And the fourth aspect, what I see is the well run GCCs have diversity and culture, right? If your GCC has a typical offshore on-site mindset, then you have actually lost it, right? So you should have one culture right from the day one. You should be building the culture saying that, and that's a responsibility of the leadership team, entire leadership team, not just the GCC leadership. They have to tell everybody saying that this is one team, just sitting in a different geography, but we are one team. We have one goal, we have one strategy, we want to achieve the same thing together as one team. And the diversity that you bring in, into that team, right? For example, at Idox, um, we have 30%, 35% women partnership. So 35% of our workforce is women. And we've actually gone beyond that. Of all the leadership positions that we have at Idox, 38% are women. And the conversations that I have with my CHRO is that, Kailash, we need to move this to 50% by 2030. And I take this as a challenge. And I said, yes, why can't we do it? Yes, we can definitely do this. Now, there are benefits to this, right? Benefits are in such a way that you get, number one benefit that you get is you get fresh ideas in the team, right? Number second benefit that you get is stability in the team, right? Women and all other diversity people actually bring a lot of stability. You actually get better decision making capabilities having diversity. Why? Is because women are not scared of asking questions. Sometimes men may be scared because they have inhibitions like, hey, I don't want to sound like a stupid in this meeting room. I didn't understand this. Somebody explain, which is kind of opens up a forum for discussion for people to have more debate, right? So there are number, and finally, most important, you can actually beat attrition by having diversity. As an example, in Idox, for the last 3 years, our attrition has been less than 3%, just because we focused more on our diversity and culture. And lastly, well-run GCCs have stronger leadership, right? Like I said, the cultural values that the leadership brings in. One of the mandates that we have at iDocs for all the leadership team is get out of your space. Whenever you have 5 or 10 minutes available on your calendar, go out, sit amongst the team, and just have a general chit chat,
right.
right? We are not intruding into everybody's productive space, but if you see there is time for you to go and speak with maybe some juniors, we
Mm,
just go and sit with some fresh hires, and we just generally ask, because when you go and sit with people, it shows that you are open for communication. They don't have the fear to come to you. And three, you actually start looking at what their perspectives are, right? Because those fresh perspectives, unless you speak with them, ask them feedback about, hey, what are the things that you think that we could change at idocs, what are the things you probably liked, what are the things you probably didn't like here and you would like to see the change, because the leadership is now going and speaking informally with people and not just coffee corner on the floor taking 5 minutes. They are now more open to actually speak up and give you the feedback because they're not scared of you anymore, right? That hierarchy is broken. So I think these are the things that clearly define a well-run GCC, where it'll show in it. End of the day, it'll show in all your KPIs, whatever KPIs you may have, it'll show up.
Thank you, Kailash. This is like the perfect recipe of running a successful GCC in India because you touched upon a lot of stuff, the maturity curve of the kind of work we are doing, the quality of work, the, value creation that happens, HR best practices to culture, diversity, to also open communication. So there's a lot of aspects covered here which help run, a successful GCC in India. So thank you for that. I'll now transition to what we call the rapid fire round, which will help us know you better as a person. And this is a quick round where one a word or a sentence in response would be great. So don't overthink at all. Are you ready? So, are you more a mountains person or a beach bum?
Definitely mountains, because Pune is surrounded by mountains and I don't miss a single monsoon in and around Pune.
So, you love nature, you love greenery. I'm assuming that. So, thank you for sharing that. Okay, on travel, I'd like to ask you one thing you never travel without that definitely goes with you for all your travel.
One thing I have never traveled without is my laptop.
Even when it's for leisure, fun, you do carry your laptop with you, right?
That's what I keep telling my teams, that I'm a victim of this. I'm from a different generation where it's now so much
Right.
imbibed in my culture that, I carry my laptop, and I always discourage my team saying that when you're on a holiday, you just be on a holiday. Don't carry your laptop, don't log in, to any of your office devices, just switch off completely. However, I'm a guilty of not
It's okay.
following that myself, because it's so much imbibed in my culture, because I come from, many, many years ago.
We're not judging you, and this is good to know. I think I do the same, so it's fine. You should know when to log in, when to log off. So that's good. I'll move to
Exactly.
the third question here. Is it tea, coffee, or any other beverage that you have that keeps you going during long work days?
It's definitely tea.
Okay.
Indian cutting chai, masala chai is what keeps me going all the time.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So, Kailash, that brings us to the end. Thank you for sharing your experiences and perspectives with us today. It was a pleasure having you on the GCC podcast. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to follow, share, and subscribe for more conversations on the future of GCCs. Until next time, this is Suchita Vishnoi signing off. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Thanks for inviting me.